Certainly. Here's a revised and more engaging version of the text. Reports of UFO sightings come from every corner of the globe. I was taken aboard a 200-foot diameter spacecraft in the Mojave Desert. I saw two immense bright red lights hanging in the air. While many believe these alien encounters are a modern phenomenon, the fact is they've been reported for thousands of years. Practically every human civilization, including those in India, Israel, the Mayans, and the Aztecs, has claimed contact with extraterrestrial beings. The idea that one or more non-human groups have been inspiring us is, to some, the truth. Millions of people around the world believe we have been visited in the past by extraterrestrial beings. But what if it were true? Did ancient aliens really help shape our history? And if so, where did they come from? And who were these visitors? Roswell, New Mexico. This sleepy town in America's Southwest was once best known for its large military airbase. But that changed in 1947 when a local rancher reported that a spaceship had crashed on his property. Several weeks later, the U.S. Army issued a press release confirming the existence of an alien craft. The next day, the military changed its story, announcing that what they had found was a weather balloon. These conflicting reports sent shockwaves around the world, and the name Roswell became a pop culture code word forever linking extraterrestrial visitation with enduring mystery. Speculation about why the Roswell crash would be covered up is difficult to pin down. Some suggest that the information could shatter our worldview. Almost everyone has heard about the so-called Roswell event, and one of the real implications of disclosure is that some of our most cherished myths about the origins of the human race, our history, and archaeology would fall apart. Something happened at Roswell, New Mexico, a long time ago. People want the truth. There's something in human nature that strives, that hungers for this knowledge to answer questions about our own existence. Today, public opinion polls indicate more than half the world's population believes aliens have either come here in the past or are coming here now. But what exactly makes so many people believe? Looking upward makes sense. The universe is vast. There are things out there we do not understand. There is probably intelligent life somewhere. People tend to forget that we're on a planet that's 4.5 billion years old. The presence of our civilization in that vast scale of time, if I snap my fingers, it wouldn't even be fast enough to represent it. To think that we're the only ones in this immense period is, to me, absurd. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, has over 100 billion stars, and in our universe we think there are more than 100 billion galaxies. So if even a fraction of those stars had planets with intelligent life, how many alien civilizations might there be? If we consider ourselves the crown of creation or the pinnacle of evolution, we might see ourselves as the greatest, the most unique in the universe. We've forgotten to learn modesty. Each step we take makes us a little less special. We used to think we were the center of the universe, but that's not true. We're not even the center of our galaxy or solar system. The more we learn, the more we realize how humbling science can be. When humans first landed on the moon, our perspective on the universe changed forever. The Eagle has landed. We, the aliens who happened to go down the ladder on July 20th, 1969, are certainly part of a magnificent race. Yet I don't think people grasp the energy it takes to go from one star to another. This historic event raised the question, if humans can successfully navigate space and explore other worlds, why couldn't beings from other parts of the universe have done the same? And might they have already come to Earth hundreds or perhaps thousands of years ago? I think humanity's past is more fantastic than we all believe. I've come to the idea that maybe extraterrestrials were on this planet. Cahuachi, Peru. 2,000 years ago, this ancient settlement served as the religious and cultural capital of the Nazca people. But around 500 AD, the Nazca mysteriously disappeared, leaving Cahuachi to fall into disarray. 1,400 years later, in 1910, anthropologist Alice Hrdlicka came to Cahuachi to study the ancient Nazca civilization. During a dig, he unearthed some of the most surprising and shocking artifacts he had ever seen. Skulls with enormous elongated craniums. Where did they come from? How did they get there? And were they human? In Peru, we find these weird elongated skulls. They're bizarre looking. These people look like aliens. One might say, okay, aliens. But another aspect we have to consider is that skull and cranial deformation, forming elongated heads, is a practice known throughout much of the ancient world. In 1870, the process of skull deformation was well chronicled by a German botanist and explorer named Georg Schweinfurth. While exploring the African Congo, he encountered a tribe called the Mangbetu. They routinely performed a ritual of cranial binding that allowed them to physically alter the shape of human skulls. They took infants' skulls, compressed and bound them, forcing the cranium to elongate, in many cases, doubling the size. The big question is, why was this being done? It may have been a way to distinguish the elite from everyday people, a social stratification issue. Perhaps it was a way to express physically, or even achieve, greater levels of consciousness or higher mental ability. In my opinion, they did this to mimic the gods, who were physical beings. If they were just figments of our ancestors' imagination, I don't think that's a compelling enough reason to expose children to such a ritual. I believe these people misinterpreted flesh and blood space travelers. Some suggest aliens had elongated skulls, and apparently ancient peoples were mimicking those skulls. As the old saying goes, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Although many images attempt to depict what aliens might look like, one in particular has dominated public perception. It features an elongated cranium and is associated with an extraterrestrial race many refer to as the Greys. In terms of entities, one very common description is the so-called Greys. 3.5 to 4 feet tall, essentially humanoid but very spindly, with disproportionately large heads and huge black almond-shaped eyes. But would someone in a primitive society really want to replicate this look and deform their skull? Some archaeologists have a different perspective. They point to artistic self-expression as an explanation for these customs. There are all kinds of people who either worship the body or use the body as art, be it tattoos or piercings, or tribes that put things in their ears or lips to grow parts of their body. Some societies practice binding parts of the body, feet or heads, to make certain shapes. This was done for various reasons. We know today that it's not usually healthy, but it doesn't mean people don't do it. People are always trying to change their bodies to look a certain way. Whatever the explanation for these rituals, they are not just found in Peru and the African Congo. Skull deformation is a global phenomenon. What's really strange is that this is found all over the world, and archaeologists cannot easily explain it. For people on remote islands, in South America, Malta, or Africa, to independently practice cranial deformation seems incredible. This is something that had to be learned, something that was taught to them. We seem to have basic similarities, as if there was one civilization, or at least one type of culture influencing people around the world. I find it increasingly difficult to believe what I was taught as an undergraduate, that all these different cultures just coincidentally came up with the same concepts independently of each other. Is it possible that societies around the world were influenced by similar events? Were they imitating real beings who visited from other planets? Some of the most compelling images of elongated craniums can be traced to ancient Egypt and the depictions of one of its most controversial pharaohs. Could it be that he, too, was mimicking the look of extraterrestrials? Or is there an even more outrageous explanation? Could he have been one of them? Egypt. Long before the ancient Egyptians built the pyramids or even settled along the Nile River, they spoke of an era called Zep Tepi, or the first time. According to legends, Zep Tepi was when sky gods descended from the stars to earth on flying boats, turning mud and water into a new kingdom. The word for God in ancient Egyptian is Neter. It means a being that came from the cosmos. They were adamant about the fact that their gods had descended from the stars. They tell us that the god Osiris, who ruled with his consort and sister, the goddess Isis, were star gods. They identified Osiris with the constellation of Orion and Isis with the star Sirius, the brightest star in the sky. Interestingly, within the constellation of Orion is the so-called nursery of stars, the zone where stars in our galaxy are literally born. It's peculiar that the ancient Egyptians insisted that the birth of star gods was in this constellation. They truly believed their origins were in the sky. Around the world, ancient civilizations had incredible knowledge of the stars, planets, and heavenly motions. The average person in the ancient world knew far more about the skies than many well-educated people today. As ancient Egypt grew into a great civilization, its citizens believed their pharaohs were sons of Osiris, and thus living gods. Artwork and wall carvings depicted them as perfect humans. While the people worshipped many different gods, the pharaoh stood above them all. This basic Egyptian religious belief remained in force for nearly 1,000 years, until one pharaoh changed everything. Who was this heretic? His name was Akhenaten, and in every surviving depiction, he is shown with an elongated skull. Who was he? According to Egyptian mythology, he too was descended from the gods who arrived on Earth during Zep-Tepi. But why do so many still believe he actually came from the stars? In 1352 BC, Akhenaten ascended to the throne as the 10th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. Almost immediately, he instituted radical religious changes, including a ban on references to multiple gods. He ordered all depictions of previous gods to be removed, allowing only one emblem, the sun disk with curious arms or rays pouring down. Why did he do this? According to his writings and poems, he was visited by one of those beings that descended from the sky, who told Akhenaten, "This is the way. I am your god." This sun god was known as Akhenaten claimed to be a direct descendant of Aten. Like any other pharaoh regarding himself as divine, he was a god, not only in his own belief but in the eyes of the nation. The definition of God was that he was a descendant from these celestial beings. During his 4th year as pharaoh, Akhenaten ordered the construction of a new capital city. He called it Amarna, and dedicated it to the sun. Akhenaten would spend the next 10 years there, during which he instituted changes in both art and culture, including how he himself would be publicly depicted in Egyptian iconography. Egyptian pharaohs are depicted as triangular-shaped beings with broad, strong shoulders and very skinny waists, the epitome of what a king ought to look like. Akhenaten, however, showed himself as he probably really was, a rather strange and mystical look. Some would say he combined feminine aspects with masculine ones and had an elongated skull. The change in royal iconography showed him with a misshapen head, a potbelly, and a sunken chest, as opposed to the idealized imagery of traditional Egyptian artists that showed a big, strong pharaoh. Akhenaten's wife, Queen Nefertiti, and their children were also depicted with elongated skulls. So why were Akhenaten's and Nefertiti's heads deformed? Did they suffer from a genetic abnormality, or did they deliberately alter their shape? Some believe there could be yet another explanation behind their strange, otherworldly appearance. They look different from other human beings. Is it possible that Akhenaten might have been an extraterrestrial hybrid? Ancient alien enthusiasts look at Pharaoh Akhenaten of Egypt and say, "Ah, look at that long head. It looks like an alien gray. That looks like something non-human or some hybrid between something else and something human. It must be evidence of alien interference, alien reproduction with humans." I've been to Egypt, and one of the most stunning things about seeing the archaeological remains is that unique pharaoh, Akhenaten. He has a very narrow, pointy face, high cheekbones, and a very elongated cranium. The idea that they were either looking like extraterrestrials or perhaps had extraterrestrial DNA in them is a credible idea. Akhenaten ruled for 17 years. After his reign, Amarna was abandoned, and temples to the sun were destroyed. Images of Akhenaten were deliberately defaced. Ancient Egypt swiftly returned to its old ways, worshipping many gods. Was this a rejection of Akhenaten's radical religious belief system or a cover-up of his alien identity? There have been many theories about why, if he had some sort of extraterrestrial connection, it would explain why he was ousted from power, and some say put to death. Some Egyptologists believe Akhenaten was forced to abdicate and flee from Egypt with a group of his loyal followers. In 1907, the actual body of Akhenaten was discovered in Egypt's Valley of the Kings by British archaeologist Edward Ayrton. After unearthing Akhenaten's mummified remains, he confirmed that the ancient pharaoh's skull was indeed misshapen and elongated. Some scholars argue that he suffered from a disorder that caused his face and head to appear longer. I think with Akhenaten, we're dealing with a physical deformation that wasn't corrected by the royal artists. They just depicted him as he was. Potbelly, sunken chest, long head. Akhenaten was succeeded by his son, Tutankhamun, who became the most renowned pharaoh of all time when his tomb was discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter. Tutankhamun was also found to have an elongated skull. Could he have inherited alien genes from his father? Today, much of Akhenaten's life remains a mystery. Did he really change Egypt's entire belief system because, as some suggest, he was a celestial being? If that's true, might there be evidence of similar entities coming to Earth? Perhaps more clues can be found thousands of miles away, on the other side of the African continent. Mali, in northwest Africa. Deep in a remote valley live the Dogon people, descendants of a nomadic tribe that settled here around 1000 AD. Just like Akhenaten's followers, the Dogon were forced to leave Egypt because of religious persecution. The Dogon maintain a very long and ancient tradition, and in my opinion, they preserve some of the ancient Egyptian traditions and myths that have been carried on right into the present age. But what exactly are their beliefs? Dogon mythology holds that the sky god, Amma, created the first living creature, known as Nomo. The legend says that shortly after his creation, Nomo multiplied into several parts, one of which rebelled against Amma. Amma responded by destroying him and scattering his ashes throughout the world. According to the Dogon myths, a god gave them this knowledge. He descended from the sky in an ark, surfing on fire and landing with a storm. Still today, the Dogon celebrate a festival in honor of Nomo and that visitation that occurred in the remote past. How do we know this? For this festival, they have wooden masks that date back a very long time to when this festival began. Dogon masks tell the mystic stories of their ancestors. This is a sculpture of the creator they call Amma. He's embracing the universe. This is how they pass on information from generation to generation, by stories carved in masks. But could Nomo have been a real person? Some see eerie similarities between the Dogon's legend and the story of the mysterious pharaoh Akhenaten. Akhenaten believed he was directly descended from the sun god Aten. Nomo was said to have been created by the sky deity Amma. Is it a coincidence that both cultures, although thousands of miles apart, shared mythical tales of beings coming from the skies, and both Nomo and Akhenaten were depicted with elongated heads? Is it possible that these legends were based on real events? The Dogon dwell in the central plateau region of Bandiagara. Their knowledge is centuries old, and the priests have been sharing it with chosen individuals only. In the 1920s, French anthropologist Marcel Griol and ethnologist Germaine Dieterlen visited the tribe and were invited to share their secrets. But one secret stood out. The Dogon claimed that their god Amma came from a specific star in the Sirius constellation, the same place where the ancient Egyptians believed their god Osiris was born. This star, which modern astronomers refer to as Sirius B, the Dogon called Potolo. But what baffles experts is that the star is so far from Earth, it's impossible to see with the naked eye. I was very intrigued by this. The Dogon should not have known about the existence of this star. Sirius B is the second nearest star from our solar system. It's 8 light-years away. In fact, it's not even visible with standard telescopes. It was first literally seen and photographed in the 1970s. Modern science has corroborated that Sirius B does indeed exist. The problem is, the Dogon knew about this before modern science confirmed it. I mean, that's spooky. Measurements taken with the Hubble telescope in 2003 have confirmed that Sirius B is what's known as a white dwarf, a partially burnt-out star with extremely dense mass. Although it is smaller in size than Earth, it's estimated to weigh 8 times as much as our Sun. But how did the Dogon acquire this ancient knowledge of astronomy that seems to be centuries more advanced than modern science? The mystery is, how did this story get passed down through generations if it came from a time before astronomers knew there was a companion star to Sirius, which can't be seen with the human eye? This is the Dogon symbol for Sirius. When you move it around, you can see an orbit around the center marked by Sirius A. Sirius B circles around it. So it is a circular system. The sign is practically an astronomical model that the Dogon could not have invented because only Sirius A is visible. Sirius B and C are invisible. However, their description of the orbit is correct. One assumption is that this god, Nomo, who brought them this knowledge, could have been an extraterrestrial intelligence. Since the early 20th century, the tribe has been routinely studied and researched by anthropologists. This has led many modern historians to claim that the Dogon must have learned about astronomy from Westerners. The Dogon mythology is so fluid that when science confirms something they might have believed in antiquity, it might have just been sheer coincidence. Or it could have been a conflation. They heard something someone said about this star in relation to another star and grafted that into their mythology. When critics suggest that this knowledge was given to them by modern ethnologists, that's simply incorrect, because we know the story goes back hundreds of years earlier than any modern ethnologist ever went there. If it were ever proven that all this information is exactly correct, including the parts still being studied by astronomers, this would mean that Earth had visitors from outer space in prehistoric times. Either they inherited that knowledge, and the question is, from where? From a previous civilization or from some sort of extraterrestrial source? Or it's a coincidence. In my view, it is not a coincidence. If the Dogon people really possess this advanced astronomical knowledge, were their legends based on real events? The ancient Egyptians and Dogon were far from alone in their belief in gods or mystical beings that came from the sky. Is there an explanation for similar myths shared by ancient cultures all around the world? And what does that reveal about who these visitors may be? Perhaps the answer can be found not in northern Africa, but here, in the rocks and canyons of the American Southwest. 30 miles south of Gallup, New Mexico, lies the Pueblo of Zuni. Sheltered from the desolate high plains, this adobe city is home to the Zuni Indians, one of the oldest indigenous tribes in North America. They have inhabited this land for almost 2,000 years and have protected their secrets even longer. The Zuni are a very interesting culture in that they're one of the few cultures that really have not opened up to the rest of the world about their star knowledge traditions. Most of this information is very closely held by the natives. I find it very intriguing that now we're starting to learn more and more about their star knowledge. Much of the Zuni people's history is etched in the rocks of the New Mexico desert. Tribal elder Clifford Mahudi and archaeologist Undan Simplicio have studied the Zuni secret history firsthand. They've collected stories passed down through generations that are rooted in the belief that the tribe's creators and protectors are supernatural beings from the sky. This one's kind of interesting here, says Simplicio. I would imagine it was created in the last century, but in this design you can see the star figure.